Well, thank you so much for having me. My name's Rosanne Haggerty. I'm someone Pat met in Brownsville, but very happy to be here because I've been a big fan of the program, and with Cheryl have been for about the last year thinking about ways that there may be some connections between the work you're doing and the work in communities that we're doing, and ways that some of the applied genius you have could help some of the real needs that we're seeing on a daily basis in Brownsville and another neighborhood of concentrated poverty, and then the rest of the work we do. This is going to be a bit improvised, and I'm predicting already that the question and answer part will be the best section of the presentation. But what I thought I would do is just give you a little bit of a who am I based on like the history of the work I've done, and then cut into, with the last slides, what next, and the way we are thinking about our organizational strategy, and the way we're thinking about the redesign of neighborhoods, of human systems, as pretty key to solving problems like concentrated poverty. So obviously we're not at the Ashoka Changemakers event, but this is sort of like my history of thinking about homelessness, which was the starting point about 30 years ago when I graduated from college. Was like I volunteered at a shelter. Thought it was so just unfathomable, actually, that there was so much goodwill mobilized, really quite a few resources, and yet we were getting such poor results for the young people who were coming to the shelter. Like very few actually had any kind of permanent place to go afterwards, and we're just going back to the streets. So that got me interested in, well, I don't think you're really, as a citizen, allowed to complain if you don't have a better idea. It's like, well, what would you do if a shelter isn't the answer, for this short-term kind of charity isn't getting anywhere near the solution to the problem? And it was plain that these young people needed everything, not just housing, a job, and supportive relationships, health care, but it was pretty plain, and maybe because I was more or less their age at the time, that what was I thinking about my life? Well, a stable place to live. How was I going to kind of take the next step in my life? So that's what got me interested in housing. Just a very pragmatic response to, like, here's a totally broken effort that is well-intentioned but getting nowhere. And so I got interested in how you develop affordable housing. Fast forward, I went to work for a great organization, and they kind of threw me in the deep end of the pool. I learned how to finance and design and project manage and deal with the neighborhood issues around housing. And then I started my own not-for-profit in 1990. And that building on the upper right-hand corner, the Times Square Hotel, was the first project that we took on. It was this big old hotel in Times Square that was in bankruptcy, like a total mess. There were like 1,700 building code violations, burned out floors, there's horrible conditions, and there are about 200 elderly and mentally ill people still living there. And mainly because it just looked like, what are we going to do here? A pretty young person, I was like 29, I think, just like, well, I have an idea. And it was a good idea. It was just pretty basic. Well, like, let's fix it up. More public housing, more every kind of use that brings with it, challenge, with like none of the civic infrastructure to make this community work. I mean, the one park is like a dust bowl. There isn't anything even like a settlement house. A few jobs, no decent markets, and so we're like, well, if we really believe that you learn the most if you start in the hardest part of the problem, let's figure what we can do and learn and then work from in Brownsville, and let's just go there and start trying stuff and work with the people who are willing to work with us. So that was in 2008. And the approach very quickly led us, using data to, as we met people, did our community organizing, we heard loud and clear that most of the problems are really concentrated around the neighborhood's big public housing blocks. There are 10,000 units of public housing in Brownsville. It's very typical of the units, and in very poor repair. And The thing that we were hearing over and over again as we did our initial organizing, where we need things for our kids. We need some way of dealing differently with the criminal justice system, and we need jobs. And then housing conditions, of course, were very high on the list, but those three things. And so we started recruiting, we had one of these moments where, okay, if we really mean it, that we're listening to what people are telling us, we've got to start, getting some of these resources mobilized here. And while they're not in Brownsville, they exist in the city. And so we went out and recruited partners in each of these areas. Center for Court Innovation to start come to the neighborhood and start working on alternatives to incarceration programs, and community court and community justice center, which is going to be developed in the neighborhood. We recruited a terrific organization, SCO Family Services, to start bringing early childhood programs and youth programs into the neighborhood. We started seeking, this has been a tough one, employers and job training partners to come in. And I'll say, in some ways, it was a good response, but it was there was we missed an insight there that I'll come back to, which is it's right to listen. But often, I think the key part of the answer is not like, well, what's the program? But how can you help people better solve those problems themselves? And that we're still kind of working. We've gotten this terrific team of partners in the organization. And before there was a vocabulary for collective impact, that's basically what we were doing. How do we align a lot of different connected and complementary efforts and knit them together so that we add up to more than the sum of the parts. But the missing piece in that, and it's a bit of a critique of collective impact, is that it's not just organizations, it's like who is the direct group of people who are experiencing the problem, and how are they being helped to kind of claim more authority and agency through that process. So that's learning along the way. So anyway, key to all this, we realize, is public housing. As long as that public housing remains like such an impossible place to live, you're going to have a whole set of bad outcomes. If you don't have access to basic services, you're spending a lot of your time just coping with stuff that's broken and disruptive in your home. It's actually causing health problems. And so we took a look at the old Towers in the Park system there that is part of what makes public housing challenging, these kind of big anonymous buildings that don't have really any clear address and they're removed from the rest of the neighborhood. And so with a pro bono architect and planner, we began studying, could you actually do something that hasn't been done in this country yet? But it's about time, and New York's the right place to do it, which is look at public housing not as a disaster, but as something that was in the beginning poorly designed and has been ill-used and poorly maintained. But how do you actually see it as an asset that can be improved, preserved, recontextualized? Where can design, urban design, rethinking the blocks, rethinking the buildings, with the participation of the residents? That's key. It's good we kind of realized earlier that we can't just get a bunch of architects here. We have to work really closely with the residents of these buildings to reimagine what the neighborhoods and their buildings can be. And so we are actually close to finalizing a feasibility study that shows how, and we're looking at Tilden Towers, which is it's 8 buildings now with about 998 units and these 2 super blocks. And we completed the feasibility study to show that it's entirely possible by sort of phasing the development to retrofit every single one of those buildings with a fairly minimal disruption to residents. People would have to move out one wing of each building at a time, but that you could checkerboard this and no one would have to even be relocated out of the site of their building. and simultaneously build 560 new units of housing on those same blocks, new affordable housing, reconnect the grid with a series of laneways, and insert ground floor retail, community facilities, and some of the other amenities that the community has needed for so long. And so in the context of, public housing needs to be rethought. There are a lot of contributing sites in the neighborhood, which I don't happen to have pictures of, that Pat and Cheryl have been out to see, which is there are some historic buildings that are boarded up. I mean, in other parts of the city, you don't see these lovely treasures, but they're completely neglected. There's this old Market Street called Belmont Avenue, which we think could be a really important sort of stake in the ground. It used to be sort of Brownsville's distinguishing kind of character in the 30s and 40s, the pushcart markets along Belmont Avenue. Now it's pretty much boarded up, or kind of a collection of kind of disconnected uses. But ways that we've begun talking about ways you could take that whole street with pop-up retail, arts, market uses, and then there are these kind of odd, we're calling them stubs out there, where like the street just ends and public housing begins. It's just like nobody was kind of in charge, it seems, when this was being designed. But you could take these areas that are now just like kind of complete dead zones and are part of this disconnection, and with some really clever design interventions, make them great spaces and help to reestablish connections through the block. So I'll just say a few closing words on our strategic plan. Community Solutions is the organization that grew out of Common Ground. Once we started working at the systems level, it's just a very different mindset from building the next building. So we created a new organization in 2011, and we work nationally, a bit internationally now. We're based here in Manhattan. We redefined our mission as helping communities solve the complex problems of their vulnerable residents. And our goal over the next 3 years is to help at least 300 communities improve the health and housing and economic circumstances of 300,000 of their most vulnerable residents. Most of that planned impact is going to come through our two national initiatives. One's called Zero 2016, which is launching in January, and that's a follow-on to the 100,000 Homes campaign, where we've selected 69 communities out of the group that applied to work with them to get them all the way to a functional zero in terms of chronic homeless and veteran homeless by the end of 2016. And then we also, out of the campaign, created a knowledge-sharing team that's working with, they're doing interesting work. They're working with Canada, a number of European countries, Australia, to help them design national efforts to, like in Canada, they'll do the 20,000 Homes campaign, Australia probably 10. And so we're in the feasibility stage with some of the European countries. And then also knowledge sharing is working with the state of New York and the city of New York on facilitating groups of local actors in solving complex problems, and specifically in high crime neighborhoods, on how you actually disrupt some of the crime patterns without reverting immediately to the criminal justice system. And then we have our neighborhood projects in Brownsville and in Hartford, Connecticut, where we've also begun building this network of, we now have 6 other neighborhood projects we found around the country, and creating a sort of learning network. So as we figure out the levers that really make a difference in these poverty neighborhoods, we want to be sharing that in real time and learning from other communities. And then what's next for Brownsville within our strategic plan is we're preparing to launch something called the 5,000 Jobs campaign, which is about getting 5,000 more residents of Brownsville into the workforce by the end of 2017. So we have about 30 partners from employers to city workforce agencies and job training organizations in NYCHA, all working to figure out how we break through the barriers in the current system, how we help employers and Brownsville residents better connect, how we support entrepreneurs in the neighborhood, and then there's a whole job creation track around bringing new businesses to Brownsville. So I'll stop there and take your questions.